There are women the West does not remember. Not because they did nothing worthy of remembering, but because they did everything quietly, in kitchens and barnyards and cold mornings before anyone else was awake. And the West in those days kept its monuments for louder things. Willa Hale was one of those women. She arrived at her grief the way most people arrive at theirs, without preparation, without ceremony, and with two small children watching her face to see if the world was still safe. She decided, looking back at them, that it was, or that she would make it so. The farm sat at the edge of what the town of Harlan called its good side, which meant it was close enough to be seen and far enough to be talked about. The fields had gone thin after her husband passed. The fence had gone crooked. The well pump needed a thing that cost money she did not have, and the back pasture was already drawing the eye of a man named Greer, who had a habit of wanting things that belonged to other people. It was a Thursday in late October when Willa walked out to the porch in the gray hour before full light and found a man she did not know asleep against her fence post. His hat pulled low, his boots worn through at the left heel. She stood there a moment. Then she went inside and poured a second cup of coffee and set it on the rail without a word. There is a particular kind of strength that does not announce itself. It does not raise its voice. It does not make a show of its suffering or its endurance. It simply continues. Through the frost, through the whispers at the dry goods counter, through the evenings when the lamp oil runs low and the children are already asleep, and there is no one to ask how the day went. Willa Hale had that kind of strength. She had been carrying it so long she no longer thought of it as strength at all. She thought of it as Tuesday. She thought of it as Wednesday. She thought of it as another day that needed getting through, and then another after that. The man at the fence post did not ask for work. He did not ask for anything. He drank the coffee, and by the time Willa came back outside, he was already splitting the wood she had not yet found a way to split, moving with the quiet economy of someone who has done hard things for a long time and stopped needing to be thanked for them. His name was Nathan. That was all she learned that first day. That was, for the time being, all she needed to know. By nightfall, she told him there was a cot in the stable. No questions about his past. He nodded once. She went inside. The arrangement was made. Some stories begin with thunder, with a great and sudden love that strikes like a change in weather. This is not that kind of story. This is the other kind. The slower kind. The kind that builds the way a fire builds when you do not rush it, feeding it carefully through the cold hours until the whole room is warm, and you cannot point to the single moment it changed. This is the story of a widow who made room at the edge of her hard life for a man who asked nothing of her, and of what grew, slowly and without announcement, in that space between the stable and the back porch. In the long silence over supper, in the cold mornings, and the early frosts, and the first snow of a November that came down from the ridge like a decision neither of them had to make out loud. It was a Thursday when Willa Hale first saw him. Not a notable Thursday, not a day the calendar had marked for anything, just the kind of gray, cold-breathed morning that comes to that part of the territory in the last week of October, when the light arrives thin and reluctant and the frost holds to the grass until nearly midday. Willa had been up since before that light. She had mended the tear in Pip's coat by the last of the lamp, banked the fire so it would hold through the cold hours, and stood at the kitchen window long enough to watch the dark pull back from the hills before she put the coffee on. That was how her days began. That was how they had begun for 14 months, since the morning she had waked to find Daniel cold beside her, and understood, in the way a person understands a thing they have been preparing for without knowing it, that the farm and the children and everything that needed doing was hers alone now. She did not think of herself as brave. She thought of herself as the person who was there. When the fence needed mending, she was there. When Clara woke in the night with a fever, she was there. When the pump began making the sound it made before it stopped working entirely, she was the one who tied a rag around the bad fitting and prayed it would hold another season. The neighbors had been kind in the beginning. Mrs. Alderman had brought a pie. The Halverson boys had split her wood once before winter set in the first year. But kindness of that particular shape has a season too, and that season had passed. And now Willa was simply the widow out on the Hale place, which people in the town of Harlan mentioned the way they mentioned weather. A thing that was there, a thing they could not do much about. She carried 2 cups out to the porch that Thursday morning, because the second cup was already poured before she saw him, and it seemed wasteful to pour it back. He was at the far fence post, the one near the old elm that had been leaning since spring, sitting with his back against the wood and his hat low over his face and his knees drawn up. The way a man sits when he has slept somewhere he was not invited, and is not sure yet what kind of morning it is going to be. His coat was a working coat, brown and mended more than once at the elbows. His boots were worn through at the left heel. He had a bedroll beside him that was more strap than blanket, and a canvas bag that did not appear to hold much. Willa looked at him for a moment. She set the second cup on the porch rail, in the open where it could be seen. Then she went back inside. When she came out again with the children's breakfast, the cup was empty, and the man was at her woodpile. He had not asked. He had found the axe where it leaned against the side of the house, and he was working through the unsplit rounds she had been putting off for 3 weeks, because the splitting hurt her shoulder, and she had not yet found a solution to that problem that did not cost money. He worked without hurry and without show, the way a man works when the work itself is the only point, not the watching of it, not the being seen doing it. He did not look up when she came out. He did not speak. He simply continued, and the wood fell in clean halves, and the pile beside him grew. Willa fed the children and watched from the kitchen window. Clara, who was 7 and had her father's habit of assessment, stood at the window beside her mother for a full minute before she said quietly that the man was doing it right, meaning the splitting, meaning the angle of the axe. Willa agreed that he was. Pip, who was 4 and had not yet developed the habit of wariness, wanted to go outside and watch from closer. Willa told him to finish his porridge. She was thinking. She was adding things up in the way she had learned to add things since Daniel died, not with hope at the front of it, not with fear either, but with a kind of clear arithmetic that left out what she could not afford to feel. The man worked until the pile was done. He did not come to the door. He did not call out. He stacked the split wood neatly against the side of the house where it would stay driest, and he put the axe back where he had found it, and then he stood by the fence with his hat in his hands and waited. That was the thing Willa would remember later, when she tried to explain it to herself. Not that he had done the work, but that he had waited after, not advancing, not leaving, just standing there with his hat in his hands in the October cold, the way a man stands when he is not asking for anything. She brought him a plate, cornbread and the last of the salt pork from Tuesday's supper. He took it with both hands and said thank you, in a voice that was quiet and without ornamentation, the voice of someone who had not spoken much that morning, and perhaps not much the morning before that. He told her his name was Nathan. He did not offer a second name, and she did not ask for one. He ate standing up at the fence, and when he was done he handed back the plate clean and looked out at the pasture with an expression she could not fully read, something between appraisal and a longer kind of quiet, the way a man looks at something he is trying to place. Willa said there was work, if he wanted it. Fence on the north side that had gone over in the September wind. The pump fitting that needed a proper repair before the hard freeze came down. Winter wood beyond what he had already split. She said she could not pay in money, she could pay in meals and a place to sleep. She said it plainly, without apology, because she had learned that apology cost her something she could not spare. He listened without interrupting. He did not look at the house with calculation. He did not look at her the way some men had looked at her since Daniel died, weighing things that were not theirs to weigh. He said that sounded all right. Willa nodded. She told him there was a cot in the stable, at the back, past the mare's stall. She told him it had a blanket that was thin but clean. And then she said the thing she had not planned to say, the thing that came out of some part of her that was tired of suspicion and forms and the asking of questions that led to more questions and never to answers that helped. She said there were no questions about his past. He could keep whatever he was keeping. It was not her business. She had enough of her own. He looked at her then, directly, for the first time. It was not a long look. It was the look a person gives when they are checking whether a thing was meant the way it was said. She held it without flinching. He put his hat back on. "All right," he said again. That was Thursday. By Friday, the north fence was standing straight. By Saturday, the pump fitting was wrapped in proper leather, and the handle moved without complaint. The children watched him from the porch. Clara kept her distance and her judgment. Pip watched with open curiosity and no agenda. And Willa went about the work of her days, the cooking, the cleaning, the mending, the small and endless repairs that a farm requires of the person who loves it. And she did not ask Nathan where he had come from, or what he had left behind, or why he was sleeping against fence posts in the gray October cold. Some things are too large for naming, and some arrangements, if you name them too soon, come apart at the seam. The days settled into a shape. That was the first thing Willa noticed. Not any single thing Nathan did, but the way the days began to have a shape again. The way they had had a shape when Daniel was alive, and the farm ran on 2 pairs of hands instead of 1. There was someone to do the far work while she did the near work. There was someone to check the animals at last light so she did not have to bundle the children and take them out into the cold. There was a lamp burning in the stable when she looked out the kitchen window at night, and the sight of it, small and steady in the dark, was something she did not have a name for and did not try to name. Nathan ate at the far end of the table. That had been his choice, not hers. On the second evening he had come to the kitchen door, hat in hand, and she had set a plate at the near end, the end where Daniel used to sit, and he had looked at it a moment and then quietly moved it to the far end and sat there instead. She did not remark on it. He had understood something without being told, and she was grateful in a way that had no words attached to it. They ate in a quiet that was not uncomfortable. Clara watched him from across the table with the focused, unblinking attention of a child conducting a private assessment. Pip ate with both hands and occasionally offered Nathan portions of things Nathan had not asked for, which Nathan accepted without complaint and ate without comment. He was good with the children, in the way that men who say very little are sometimes good with children, not performing goodness, not making a show of patience, but simply treating them as small people whose presence was reasonable and whose questions deserved a straight answer. When Pip asked him one morning why the mare favored her left side when the ground was wet, Nathan considered the question seriously, and then walked Pip out to the corral and showed him, hand over the horse's foreleg, where the old injury had healed a little crooked. He explained it in few words, in terms a 4-year-old could hold. Pip nodded as though this was the kind of information he had been waiting for. He repeated it back to Willa at supper, almost exactly right. Clara took longer. She was 7, and 7 had been the age she was when her father died, and she had learned in that year to be careful about what she let herself expect from people. She watched Nathan the way she watched the weather, looking for the sign that would tell her what was actually coming, not what it looked like on the surface. She did not speak to him directly for the first week. She watched him repair the north corner of the chicken coop one afternoon, and when he was done she came out and inspected the work without commenting on it, running her hand along the new board the way her father used to run his hand along work he was checking. Nathan saw her do it. He did not smile. He picked up his tools and moved on to the next thing, and Willa, watching from the porch, understood that he had passed some test whose terms only Clara knew. The town had noticed. Towns like Harlan always noticed. It was a Tuesday when Willa went in for lamp oil and flour and felt the quality of the silence change as she came through the door of the dry goods store. Mrs. Alderman was there, and the Halverson wife, and a woman named Margaret Prewitt, who had never liked Willa in the particular, focused way that some people dislike other people, for reasons that have more to do with themselves than with the person they have chosen. Margaret did not say anything directly. She had a gift for saying things without saying them. A look held a moment longer than courtesy required. A remark made to the air just beside Willa's ear about the importance of a widow being careful about her reputation, for the sake of the children, if nothing else. Willa bought her oil and her flour. She did not respond. She had learned that silence, deployed correctly, was a more effective tool than argument. The man who presented a more particular problem was Greer. Ellis Greer had a spread to the east of Harlan and a manner that was smooth on the surface and grasping underneath, the way a river can look calm and still be moving fast. He had come to the farm twice in the months after Daniel died, each time with his hat in his hand and a kind word on his face and an offer for the back pasture that was somewhat below what the pasture was worth and somewhat above what Greer thought Willa could afford to refuse. She had refused it both times. He had not been back since, but she had the feeling, the way you can feel a change in air pressure before a storm, that his interest in the pasture had not diminished. It had simply waited. Nathan saw Greer's name on an old bill of sale Willa kept in the cedar chest with the farm papers, and he did not ask about it directly. He asked one evening whether the back pasture had ever been in dispute. Just that. Willa told him, briefly, what there was to tell. He listened with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on the middle distance, the way a man listens when he is putting things in order rather than waiting for his turn to speak. He did not say what he thought. He did not offer to handle it. He simply nodded once, as though a question he had been holding had been answered, and then he asked if there was more coffee and the subject was closed, but he began after that to do something Willa noticed without remarking on. He began to be visible in the back pasture, not in any way that called attention to itself, not standing guard, not making a show of presence, just working there near the fence line that bordered the road Greer used, doing the ordinary things that needed doing, clearing brush, checking the posts, moving stones from the low corner where the spring water collected. He was there in the mornings when the light was good and sometimes in the afternoons when the work elsewhere was done. He was simply there, the way a thing that belongs somewhere is there, without needing to explain itself. The first frost came in the second week of November, harder than expected, and it took the last of the kitchen garden. Willa stood in the garden at first light and looked at what the cold had done, and she did not cry, because crying was something she did privately and infrequently, and only when it would help. She made a list in her head of what had been lost and what could be replaced and what could be managed without. When she came back inside, Nathan was already at the stove, because he had seen her go out and had started the fire without being asked. He handed her a cup of coffee. He did not say that he was sorry about the garden, because he was not a man who said things that did not add to what was already known. He handed her the cup and she took it, and they stood together in the kitchen for a moment in the gray morning light, not speaking, the frost still visible through the window on the ruined garden. And it was enough. It was more than enough. Sometimes the truest form of comfort is just a person standing beside you who does not need you to explain. November came down from the ridge the way it always did in that country. Not all at once, but in increments, each morning a little darker than the one before, each evening closing a little sooner, until one day you looked up and realized the light was gone before supper, and the cold had stopped being a visitor and become a resident. The pass to the north, which connected Harlan to the larger town of Caldwell, began to look uncertain. The men who knew that country knew it could close hard by the end of the month, some years earlier, and once it closed, it stayed closed until March. Willa had wintered on the farm alone before. She knew what it required. She was taking stock, in the quiet way she took stock of things. When Nathan began reinforcing the stable walls without being asked, packing the gaps with the cut sod he had stacked and dried through October, working steadily and without comment against the cold that was coming whether or not anyone was ready for it. He did not say he was staying through the winter. He did not say he was not. The saddlebag still hung on the post inside the stable, still packed, still carrying the shape of a man who had not decided. Willa did not look at it when she brought the morning feed to the mare. Or she looked at it the way you look at something you have decided not to think about. Which is to say, she was aware of it every time. She had made no claims on him. The arrangement was what it had always been. Work for board, no questions, no obligations that either of them had named out loud. She held to that. She was good at holding to things. It was a Wednesday morning when Ellis Greer came to the farm for the third time. He came alone, which was how he always came, because men like Greer understood that witnesses complicate things. He tied his horse at the gate and came up the path with his hat in his hand and the smooth, patient expression of a man who has decided in advance that he is going to get what he came for. Willa met him on the porch. She did not invite him in. He produced a paper from inside his coat, folded twice, official-looking. The kind of paper designed to make people feel that the matter has already been settled somewhere above them. He said the paper showed an easement on the back pasture that predated Daniel's deed. An old surveying arrangement from before the county line was redrawn. He said it calmly, without cruelty, the way a man delivers a thing he has been polishing for a while. He said he was sorry about it. He did not look sorry. Willa took the paper. She read it through once, slowly, the way she read everything, not rushing, not showing on her face what she was finding. She did not understand all of it. Some of the language was the kind of language designed not to be understood by the person it was being used against. She asked Greer to leave it with her. He said he needed it back, that it was his only copy. And she said that was a shame, and kept it in her hand, and looked at him in a way that ended the conversation. He left with his hat still in his hand, and the smooth expression somewhat less smooth than it had been. Nathan was not on the porch. He was at the woodpile, visible from where Greer had stood, working at a steady pace with his back to both of them. He had been there the whole time. He had not turned around once. That evening, Nathan sat with the paper by the lamp for a long time. Willa had set it on the table after supper without comment, and he had drawn it toward him without comment. And they had arrived at an understanding without a word of negotiation. Clara and Pip were in bed. The fire had settled to a low, even burn. Nathan read the paper the way a man reads something he is not willing to be defeated by, going back over the same lines, holding the language up against what he knew, which was apparently more than Greer had calculated. He did not say what he was thinking. He did not make promises. He folded the paper when he was done and set it on the table and drank the last of his coffee and said good night and went out to the stable. He rode out before first light the next morning. Willa heard the mare on the frozen ground and lay still in the dark and did not think about it or tried not to. She got up and made the fire and the children's breakfast and did the near work and the far work both, the way she had done it before October, without complaint. Because complaint had never once fixed a fence post or drawn water from a reluctant well. She told herself the arrangement had always been temporary. She told herself this was simply the shape of things. She told herself these things with some success until midday, and then with somewhat less. And by late afternoon she had stopped telling herself anything and was simply working because working was the thing to do. He came back before dark. He came through the gate on the mare at a walk, not a hurry, the way a man comes home from an errand rather than a departure. He unsaddled the horse himself and came to the kitchen door and knocked, which he had never done before. He had always come around to the side, the working entrance, and when Willa opened it, he held out a folded paper, different from Greer's paper, cleaner and more recently produced. He did not explain it at length. He said he had been to the county recorder's office in Caldwell, which was a long day's ride there and back on a road that was nearly ice. He said the easement Greer had presented was drawn against a property boundary that no longer existed, that it had been voided when the county line was redrawn in the year 1873, and that the recorder had been willing to put that in writing. He set the paper on the table beside Willa's hand, not in her hand, beside it. She read it. She read it twice. The back pasture was hers, cleanly and without condition, and now there was a document that said so in language that even Greer could not polish into something else. She looked up at Nathan, who was standing at the far end of the kitchen with his coat still on, waiting in the way he always waited, without pressing, without needing the moment to be larger than it was. She thanked him. He nodded. He said the mayor had done most of the work and he would appreciate some supper if there was any left. There was. Clara set his plate at the far end of the table without being asked. Pip passed him the molasses before he had reached for it, anticipating the want the way children anticipate the habits of people they have been watching carefully. Nathan took the molasses and said thank you and put some on his cornbread, and the kitchen was warm, and outside the first real cold of November pressed against the window glass, and inside it was warm. She found the saddlebag that morning. Not by searching. She was not a woman who searched through what was not hers, but by the ordinary accident of going to the back of the stable for the spare feed pail. And there it was, hanging on the post where it had always hung, packed and strapped the way it had been since October. She stood and looked at it for a moment. It was a plain bag, canvas and leather, worn at the buckles, carrying no particular sentiment in its appearance. A traveling bag, the bag of a man who had not yet arrived anywhere permanently. She picked up the feed pail and went back to the work and did not mention it, because there was nothing to say about a thing that had not been offered to her, and nothing to ask about a thing whose answer was already hanging there in plain sight. Pip found Nathan in the corral that afternoon, clearing the snow from around the gate so it would swing free. Pip had his father's old coat on, the one Willa had cut down to fit him in September, and his boots left small tracks in the white that Nathan looked at after the boy had gone. Looked at the way a man looks at something that has moved him, and that he does not intend to show has moved him. Pip stood at Nathan's elbow and watched him work, and then picked up the second shovel, the small one that hung by the stable door, and began to clear his own section with the serious, imitative focus of a 4-year-old who has decided that this is what men do, and he is going to be one. Nathan did not tell him to go inside. He worked beside him, matching his pace to the boy's without making it obvious, and together they cleared the gate. And when they were done, Nathan said that was good work, and Pip said he knew. Clara came to a decision of her own that week. It arrived without ceremony, the way Clara's decisions arrived, not announced, not explained, simply present one day where it had not been before. She began setting Nathan's place at the table herself, before Willa asked her to, moving his plate to the far end with the same care she took with her own. She began reporting things to him that she would previously have reported only to Willa. The loose board on the porch step, the place where the snow was drifting up against the chicken coop wall, the fact that the gray hen had not come in with the others. She delivered these reports in her precise, economical way, and Nathan received them with the same precision and acted on them without elaboration. And between them there developed a working relationship that had its own grammar and required no translation. Willa watched it happen from the edges. She did not interfere with it. Some things, if you point at them, fly away. Greer did not come back. Word had traveled, the way word always traveled in a town like Harlan, about the paper from the county recorder, about the boundary and the voided easement, about the particular futility of pressing a claim that had already been examined and found empty. He was seen at the dry goods store on a Tuesday, and he did not ask after Willa Hale, and no one mentioned the Hale place to him, and that was the end of Ellis Greer as a problem. It was not a dramatic ending. It was the kind of ending that comes when a man realizes that what he wanted is no longer available at the price he was willing to pay, and he turns his attention elsewhere. The back pasture stayed as it had always been, Willa's, the fence post straight, the ground sleeping under snow and waiting for spring. Margaret Prewitt said something to Mrs. Alderman on a Wednesday in early December about the situation out at the Hale place, using the word situation in the way that word is used when the speaker wants to suggest disorder without specifying it. Mrs. Alderman, who had brought that first pie 14 months ago, and who had known Willa Hale longer than Margaret Prewitt had lived in Harlan, said that the farm looked better than it had in years, and the children looked well fed, and she did not see a situation, she saw a woman managing. After that, the subject did not come up again at the dry goods store, or if it did, it was not in the same tone, and eventually it was not raised at all. The town, in its slow and unannounced way, had made its peace with the Hale farm and the quiet man who worked it. That peace was not offered with any ceremony. It was simply present one day, the way the snow was present, a thing that had happened while no one was specifically watching. It was the third week of December when Pip fell asleep against Nathan's arm. They had been sitting on the bench by the fire after supper, Nathan with the day's last cup of coffee and Pip beside him, closer than he usually sat, narrating something about the gray hen's behavior that had been concerning him. The narration wound down gradually, the way a child's narration does when sleep is coming from behind without warning. And then Pip's head was against Nathan's arm, and his breathing had changed, and he was gone. Nathan sat very still. He did not shift. He did not look around to see if he was being observed. He set his coffee cup down on the floor beside the bench with great care so that the sound would not disturb the boy. And then he sat with his arm slightly out, supporting without confining, the way a man holds something he has decided not to drop. Willa saw it from the kitchen doorway. She stood there for a moment in the warm dark of the doorway with the fire in front of her, and the cold outside and the smell of supper still in the room. And then she went back to her bread and did not say anything about it, because some things are too large for naming, and the naming would only make them smaller. The saddlebag was still on the post in January. It was still there in February. By the time the snow began to thin at the edges and the first cold water ran back into the creek and the gray hen started laying again, and the pine lifted their heads from the weight they had been carrying all winter, the saddlebag was still hanging where it had always hung. No one in the house looked at it anymore, not because they had forgotten it was there, but because a thing that is not going anywhere eventually stops being a question. The fire burned through the winter, and the children grew, and the farm held, and the days had their shape. And outside the world was cold and large and indifferent, and inside the lamp was lit, and the table was set, and there was enough. There was more than enough. And the horse in the corral stood quietly in the cold morning air, and the smoke rose from the chimney in a straight line into a pale and windless sky. And the creek ran under its last skin of ice, and the pines held their green through everything, the way certain things hold through everything, patient and without asking to be noticed. The fire burned. The world continued, and somewhere in the county recorder's office in Caldwell, a clean piece of paper said that the land was hers, and it was, and it always would be, and that was enough to build a life on. It had always been enough. She had just needed one quiet Thursday in October to remind her of it. And that was the story of Willa Hale and the man named Nathan who came with nothing but a bedroll and a pair of worn-through boots and left nothing at all, because he did not leave. That was the story of a woman who made room at the edge of her hard life for one person who asked nothing of her and found that nothing, given freely, has a way of becoming everything that actually matters. Let me know in the comments how this one felt. I hope it found you well. See you in the next one.